"You stop right there!" The voice echoed through the hall like a slap. Professor Glenn Rayford, famed mathematician with accolades longer than the chalkboard itself, stood up and pointed his finger right at the woman in the green custodial uniform who had just stepped into the room. "What is this, a joke? Did someone lose their mop?" Laughter erupted. Some students clapped, others grabbed their phones, eager to record the incident. She stood still, holding a cleaning rag in one hand and a half-empty spray bottle in the other. Rayford wasn't done. He marched closer. "This is a conference for minds, not mops. We don't need someone like you near these equations, unless you're planning to wipe them clean too." He looked back at the audience, smirking as if he delivered the punchline of the year. The room laughed harder, but the woman said nothing. Not a word. Her eyes didn't plead, didn't flinch. They simply moved toward the massive chalkboard, where the unsolved problem had sat untouched for 2 days. She took one step forward, then another. The rag slowly dropped from her hand and hit the floor with a soft thud. And in that precise silence, something strange happened. No one stopped her. Not because they respected her, but because something in her walk said she didn't come to clean the board, she came to rewrite it. The Franklin National Mathematics Summit wasn't just a gathering, it was a walled city. A walled city built not of stone and steel, but of citations, credentials, and cold intellect. Held every 3 years at the historic Ivy-tier Franklin University, it attracted the kind of people who wrote textbooks, not just read them. The grand auditorium was designed like an opera house for numbers, mahogany trim, marble floors polished to mirror, shine, subtle golden lights arched above each row. Even the silence inside had a pedigree. On stage, projected in elegant serif typeface, was the challenge problem, a tangled mess of symbols and notations unsolved and untouched. Professors from MIT, Princeton, and Stanford had taken turns analyzing it on day 1. They walked away scratching their heads. Day 2 saw theorists from Tokyo, Zurich, and Tel Aviv dissect the structure. Still no breakthrough. Now on day 3, the board remained clean. No one dared to taint it with a guess. And then she walked in. No name tag, no research paper, no PhD. Only a green custodial uniform, a spray bottle swinging from her hip, and the quiet poise of someone who had seen every corner of this campus, just not from the stage. People didn't notice her at first. Not until Professor Glenn Rayford's outburst in Part 1 sliced through the air and pointed all eyes toward her. Now she stood under the spotlight, uninvited, unwanted, and undeniably present. The hall grew heavy with a particular kind of stillness, the kind that arrives when a stranger enters a space fiercely guarded by tradition. Rows of seats bore name cards printed in glossy ink. Dr. Moises Haldane, author of Topology in the 22nd Century Prof. Evelyn Sharp, Fields Medal nominee Dr. Glenn Rayford, host and unofficial gatekeeper of mathematical legitimacy. And then there was her, standing without a name, without a seat, without anyone saying she deserved to be here. She stepped forward, 1 row, 2 rows. No one dared to stop her, not because they welcomed her, but because she carried herself in a way that confused them. Her posture didn't beg for entry. It claimed space cameras that were raised to mock her. Now hesitated, some were slowly lowered. This didn't feel like a joke anymore. From the back, a student whispered, "What if she's not bluffing?" A ripple moved through the room, not sound but something deeper. Anticipation, fear, suspicion. Some were hoping to watch her fail. Others, for the first time, began to hope she might not. She approached the stage like someone returning to a room she had been in before, 1 foot on the first step. A second, then silence again. Someone near the front muttered through clenched teeth, "This is ridiculous. She doesn't even have clearance to stand there," and yet she did. Not because it was allowed, but because no one dared deny her. And as she reached for the chalk and lifted it gently from the ledge, the entire room held its breath, not out of respect, but because something about her said she wasn't stepping into their world. They were about to be dragged into hers. The first line of chalk met the board. A clean, precise stroke, straight, confident, almost surgical. And that was enough to set the room off again. Professor Glenn Rayford scoffed loudly, then chuckled. "Well, would you look at that? She's been watching us long enough to mimic our posture. Bravo." He took a few steps closer to the stage. "Did you memorize that from YouTube videos? Or did you find an old lecture note in the trash while cleaning my office? Laughter bubbled up from the right corner of the hall. It was crueler this time, more pointed. She didn't react. Her hand moved steadily, drawing a bracket, then a transformation function. Rayford kept going. His voice rose, gaining rhythm, like a preacher delivering scorn. This is why we protect the sanctity of this space. You let just anyone walk in, and suddenly they think they're Gauss in a jumpsuit. He turned to the audience. Let me guess. She thinks math is just intuition. That if she stares at it long enough, the symbols will whisper secrets into her mop-scented dreams. Another wave of laughter. Even some of the younger scholars, those who had looked uncertain earlier, began to chuckle. She kept writing brackets limits, elegant symmetry, no stalling, no hesitation. But then Rayford snapped. Enough, he bellowed, pointing his finger at her like a gavel. Put down the chalk. This isn't a sandbox. This is mathematics, and you. He took one final step forward, climbing onto the first stair of the stage. You are a fraud, a parasite, feeding off a world you'll never understand. His face contorted. Spit clung to the corner of his mouth. Still, no response. She just turned her head slightly, barely, and said softly, I haven't even begun, and continued. The room shifted. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't guesswork. The structure of her writing revealed something terrifying. She understood what she was doing, maybe more than they did. Silence took hold. Even Rayford, suddenly aware he had gone too far, didn't speak again. Eyes turned not toward the board, but toward her hand, gliding like it had waited years for this moment. Near the back, a woman leaned in and whispered to her colleague, That operator? I've seen it before. It's from the anonymous Lambda X papers. The man's eyes widened. You think she don't say it? Not yet, because the truth wasn't ready. Not until she finished. The chalk made a soft clicking sound as it struck the board, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. She had filled nearly half the space now. Where others hesitated with notes and drafts, she wrote in finished sentences of mathematics, clean, elegant logic, each line building on the last. Some patterns were familiar, others entirely foreign. The room wasn't laughing anymore. It was watching quietly, uncomfortably. And then came the moment the crack Rayford, still planted at the foot of the stage, couldn't take it anymore. She was drawing something unfamiliar now. A strange operator looped with a slanted sigil no one had yet published. To him, it wasn't just threatening, it was humiliating. He charged up the steps, stopping just inches from her. I said stop, he shouted, voice breaking. She didn't flinch. You're vandalizing that board with nonsense, he growled. What gives you the right? Then he did it. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. Gasps erupted. Chairs creaked. A few stood. Even the camera crew flinched. She looked down at his hand, then back at him. Calm. I told you. She said I haven't begun. And with her other hand, she broke the chalk deliberately in two. One piece she dropped to the floor. The other she handed to him. If you think I'm wrong, she said, then finish it. She stepped aside. A single move, but it echoed like thunder. Rayford stood frozen. He looked at the chalk, then the board, then the room. No one moved, no one dared help him, because deep down, they all knew he couldn't. What she had started was beyond his grasp. Worse, it exposed the fragility of his ego, his showmanship, his reliance on prestige over substance, and then the final blow came not from her lips, but from someone in the audience. Let her continue. It was Dr. Evelyn Sharp Fields, medal nominee, one of the most respected voices in the room. I recognize that transformation. It's not gibberish. It's an unpublished derivation of an open structure I've only seen referenced once, 10 years ago, by someone called Lambdux. Gasps again. A hush followed. Rayford stepped back, his fingers still clutching the broken chalk, now useless in his grip. The woman didn't speak. She just returned to the board, picked up a new stick of chalk, and continued. This time, no one interrupted, not because they respected her, but because now they feared what else she might reveal. The room no longer breathed, not collectively, not in rhythm. Every inhale came shallow and uncertain, as if the air itself had turned fragile. She wrote with unwavering, calm eyes fixed on the chalkboard, as though the crowd had dissolved. And in a way they had, because in that moment she was the only one truly present. Then the double doors at the back creaked open. Heads turned, first row, second, third. A man in a slate-gray suit entered, walking with measured confidence. No rush, no spectacle, just gravity and motion. Some recognized him instantly. Others needed a whisper. "Is that—" Director Vaughn. A sharp intake of breath spread like a ripple. Dr. Nathaniel Vaughn, director of the Federal Institute for Advanced Mathematics. A name usually reserved for textbooks, journals, and top-secret defense projects. He hadn't been scheduled to attend. He didn't need to attend. And yet, here he was. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just watched. All eyes flicked between the woman at the board and the man standing at the rear, arms folded. The weight of it was suffocating. Suddenly, Dr. Glenn Rayford seemed much smaller. Even Evelyn Sharp lowered her voice as she leaned to a colleague. "If Vaughn's here..." This just became historic. The woman didn't pause. She filled the final third of the board with swift precision. Then, without drama, she stepped back, chalk still in hand. And then she drew a box around her work, a single silent gesture. But to mathematicians in that room, it was thunder, because boxing a solution meant one thing. She was finished, gasps again. Someone clapped once, another joined. Then the wave came. But Vaughn raised his hand, and just like that silence returned, he stepped forward. The crowd parted instinctively, reverently. He reached the front and stood before the chalkboard. For a full minute, he said nothing. His eyes scanned every line, every mark. Then softly, "This is correct. All of it. And not just correct, it's elegant. I've only seen fragments of this approach, attempted in deep theory circles, never completed. Until now," he turned to the room, "I'd like to know the name of the person who solved this." A pause, and for the first time since she entered, the woman finally spoke aloud, clear, calm, and without apology. "My name is Marla Avery." Vaughn nodded slowly. "Ms. Avery, on behalf of the Institute, I'd like to invite you to lead a research project under full grant." A roar swept through the room. Rayford's mouth hung open. Someone dropped a coffee cup that shattered on the marble, but Marla didn't react. She simply said, "I need time to consider," then turned back to the board, gently wiping a tiny smudge on the lower left corner. And that was when the whispers began again. Not of doubt, not of derision, but of awe, because no one had ever refused him before. For a moment the world existed only in hushed awe. Everyone stood suspended in some delicate equilibrium, uncertain whether they had just witnessed genius or the birth of a new era. But Marla Avery wasn't basking in it. She didn't soak in the applause or acknowledge the nods or smile at the cameras that now slowly zoomed in on her. She simply continued adjusting the bottom corner of the chalkboard, fixing a barely visible smudge that no one else would have noticed. A detail-oriented mind, a mathematician's touch. She just refused the most powerful man in our field. Someone whispered, "No one's ever done that," said another. But who is she really? That's when the woman in the third row stood up. It was Dr. Evelyn Sharp, her voice calm but deliberate. "I'd like to say something." The room quieted again. Sharp turned toward the board, her eyes tracing the solution, line by line, then settled on a peculiar symbol drawn near the bottom, left. 3 diagonal lines, 1 looped arrow, a tiny subscript, X 27. Sharp's eyes widened, her breath caught. "That's it," she said softly. "That's her signature." Vaughn turned. "You recognize it." Sharp nodded slowly. "Lambda X, the anonymous mathematician who solved the Alcire conjecture. The first proof of rotating vector decays in multidimensional topologies. The same one who disappeared 8 years ago after rejecting a $1 million contract from Geneva Labs and vanishing from the academic record." The room gasped. All eyes turned back to Marla, who had now stepped away from the board and begun packing up her small canvas bag filled with no laptop, no notes, just a rag and an extra stick of chalk. No denial, no explanation. That was the confirmation. Rayford, still standing off to the side, looked pale. "You mean she's been here all along, cleaning floors?" Sharp didn't answer because the answer was obvious. Marla turned briefly to Vaughn, her voice low but steady. "I never disappeared, I just stopped speaking. People listen better that way." Vaughn didn't press further. He simply nodded with deep respect. "Then I'm glad you chose to speak now." And then came the twist no one saw coming. A student in the back raised a trembling hand. "Ms. Avery, your file in the university registry. It lists you as having applied to the math PhD program. 10 years ago, Marla looked at the student, and for the first time all day, her voice carried a trace of something new. Not pride, not defiance, but memory. Yes, she said, I applied, and the student asked, I was rejected. She replied, no reason given. A silence settled over the room, thicker, heavier than before. A silence made of shame. Then Vaughn spoke again, his voice clear, unwavering. Then allow me to say this on behalf of every institution that failed to see you. We were wrong. He turned to the crowd. Let history show that brilliance never needed permission to enter this room. Marla didn't respond. She just offered a small, polite nod, slung her bag over her shoulder, and began to walk out. Not like someone leaving, but like someone who had always known she would return. The next morning, the video went viral. It started with a shaky vertical clip, a woman in a green custodial uniform calmly solving a problem that had eluded the brightest minds in mathematics. But what made it explode wasn't the brilliance, it was the cruelty. Rayford's voice, sharp mocking, relentless, echoed in every frame. You are a fraud, a parasite, feeding off a world you'll never understand. The internet was swift. Clips were sliced, subtitled, shared. Marla Avery trended globally within hours. Let her finish, just as she was right. But it didn't stop there. Within 24 hours, the university's inbox flooded with demands, investigations, apologies, resignations. A formal statement was issued. We are reviewing the circumstances surrounding Ms. Avery's prior application and regret any systemic failures that may have occurred. Translation: they knew they'd messed up. Rayford, meanwhile, tried to vanish. He canceled all lectures, deleted his social media. But screenshots are forever. Clips of his rant were now sound bites on podcasts, memes on Reddit, and analysis in The Atlantic. By day 3, students staged a sit-in in front of the math building. Signs read, "We don't fear brilliance, we fear arrogance. Let genius speak, no matter the uniform." And then came the most unexpected blow. Dr. Evelyn Sharp published an open letter. She didn't attack Rayford directly. She didn't need to. Brilliance is not a ladder to climb, but a light to carry. Some of us forgot that Ms. Avery reminded us. The message was clear and brutal. Rayford's silence after that wasn't professional. It was permanent. He resigned the next week, but Marla Avery never asked for any of this. She declined interviews, turned down book deals, refused media appearances. When a journalist from The New Yorker asked her for a quote, she simply said, "I didn't solve that problem for the applause. I solved it because it was beautiful." And just like that, the story shifted from scandal to inspiration. Teachers began sharing her clip in classrooms. Women in STEM posted her photo with captions like, "She didn't need permission." Marla Avery had become more than a mystery. She had become a mirror, a reflection of every brilliant soul who had been dismissed, every quiet thinker who was told they weren't enough, every hidden genius still sweeping floors in the shadows of institutions too blind to see them. And yet, she never gloated, never pointed fingers, never uttered a single word of revenge. Her silence was the sentence, and the world heard it loud and clear. Marla Avery didn't throw celebrations. She didn't give lectures. She didn't even attend the ceremony, where the university posthumously awarded her a full honorary doctorate. Instead, she returned to the same routine. Mornings still began before sunrise. She still took the side stairwell, still carried her own mop bucket. When asked why, she answered simply, "Because unfinished floors still need cleaning." But things had changed. Professors now stood when she passed. Students paused their chatter. And every once in a while, someone would silently leave a folded piece of paper on her cart. An equation, a question, a line of math with hope tucked inside it. She never responded directly. But sometimes the answer would appear written in chalk on a forgotten corner of the board the next morning. No name, no credit. Just truth quietly offered. And in that stillness, she built something no outrage ever could respect. Rayford's old office vacant. It remained empty by choice. No one wanted to sit where arrogance had failed. Marla, however, never mentioned him again. When a reporter tried to bring it up, she smiled faintly and said, "The real story wasn't about him. It never was. Because her victory wasn't loud. It wasn't lit by revenge. It was lit by resolve. by the simple, unwavering idea that excellence doesn't require recognition, just space. And now, the world was finally learning how to make room. The world had watched a woman rise without shouting. They had seen brilliance walk in through the service door, leave through the front, and never once ask for applause. And in that silence, something shifted. In classrooms, in labs, in hiring committees, people began to ask themselves, who else have we overlooked? Because Marla Avery wasn't an anomaly. She was a reminder that genius isn't always loud, that talent doesn't always wear a title, that power sometimes comes with calluses, not credentials. And most importantly, that true greatness never begs to be seen. It simply keeps showing up until the world has no choice but to look. This wasn't just about a chalkboard or a solved equation, or even a name. It was about what happens when the world stops listening to noise and starts noticing the quiet. Maybe this story reminded you of someone, a teacher, a janitor, a friend yourself. Someone whose brilliance went unseen because it didn't come wrapped in status, So don't let this moment pass. Share it, write about it, talk about it in the comments section. Because stories like Marla's don't just inspire, they expose. They reveal the cracks in the systems we trust and the beauty that blooms through them anyway. So, if this story moved you even a little, don't keep it quiet. Send it to someone who needs to believe again. And subscribe, because the next story might just change the way you see the world again. And trust me, you won't want to miss it.